There is a terrifying rhythm to history, a mathematical heartbeat that has stopped three global superpowers dead in their tracks over the last 500 years. It is not a random occurrence. It is a sequence, a script. And right now, in 2025, the United States is not merely reading from that script. We are acting it out, scene by scene, disaster by disaster, moving toward a finale that has destroyed every single empire that dared to ignore the warning signs. To understand what is coming, you have to strip away the modern noise. Forget the daily stock market fluctuations. Forget the political theater. Look at the raw data of history. In 1590, Spain wasn't just a country, it was the titan of the age. They held the keys to half the world's gold and silver. Their infantry, the tercios, were invincible. Their currency was the first true global standard. If you bet against Spain in 1590, you were a fool. 80 years later, they were bankrupt, broken, a second-rate relic that would never rise again. In 1914, the British Empire was the largest structure of power human beings had ever built. The sun literally never set on their dominion. The pound sterling was as good as gold. Actually, it was gold. London whispered, and the world obeyed. 4 decades later, the empire had evaporated, the currency had collapsed. Britain was reduced to being America's junior partner, holding on to memories of a power that vanished overnight. In 1991, the Soviet Union stood as the binary opposite to the West. A nuclear leviathan, a colossus spanning 11 time zones. It had global reach, space stations, and an ideology that promised to bury capitalism. It ceased to exist in less than 900 days, not because of an invasion, not because of a nuclear war, but because of an economic heart attack. 3 times, 3 different centuries, 3 distinct ideologies, but they all died the exact same death. They all followed the exact same 7-stage sequence. And here is the reality that should keep you awake at night. The United States has already completed 5 of those 7 stages. We are not approaching the precipice. We are already falling. We just haven't hit the ground yet. This is the anatomy of how empires die, why they always believe they are the exception, and why the math says we are next. Before we dissect the pattern, we need to redefine what collapse actually looks like. When we hear that word, we think of Hollywood movies, burning cities, sudden anarchy, zombies in the street, but in the real world, imperial death is slower, quieter, and much more painful. Imperial collapse does not begin on the battlefield. It begins in the ledger. It starts with economic exhaustion. The empire, drunk on its own success, extends beyond its ability to pay for itself. It builds bases it cannot maintain. It fights wars on multiple fronts it cannot win. It makes promises to its citizens it cannot keep. At first, the rot is invisible. The currency still trades. The aircraft carriers still sail. The politicians still give speeches about eternal strength. But beneath the surface, the termites are eating the foundation. Resources are misallocated. Instead of building factories, the empire builds weapons. Instead of innovating, it speculates. The best minds, the engineers, the creators, the visionaries, stop building things and start moving money around, or they simply leave. Then comes the acceleration. Allies start to hedge their bets. Enemies begin to test the perimeter, poking at the giant to see if it still has the will to fight. Trade partners quietly seek alternatives to your currency. And suddenly, the very things that made you a superpower, your global reach, your endless credit, your military dominance, transform into the weights that drown you. This isn't theoretical. This is the biography of Spain. It is the obituary of Britain. It is the autopsy of the Soviet Union. And it is happening to us because we are making the exact same decisions they made. We suffer from the same hubris. We believe our power is a law of physics rather than a temporary condition. We have overextended our military. We have debased our currency to worthless paper, and we are refusing to look at the math until the avalanche is already burying us. Let's rewind to the original blueprint. The first global casualty, the Spanish Empire, spanning the 1500s and 1600s. If you want to see the future of America, look at the ghost of Spain. After Columbus opened the door to the Americas in 1492, Spain didn't just get rich, they won the lottery of history. They conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, seizing control of the Potosi mines, the richest silver veins ever struck by a pickaxe. By 1550, Spanish galleons were hauling 200 tons of silver across the Atlantic every single year. By 1600, that number doubled. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe. The Real de a Ocho, the Spanish dollar, was the world's reserve currency. It was accepted in markets from Shanghai to Seville. Everyone wanted Spanish silver. And this is where the tragedy begins. This is where the resource curse kicks in. When a country controls the money of the world, it starts to believe that money is wealth. It forgets that wealth is production. Wealth is what you make, not what you dig up or print. Enter King Philip II, ruling from 1556 to 1598. He was a devout, serious man who possessed more liquid capital than any monarch in human history. He should have ushered in a millennium of prosperity. Instead, he spent it all on the drug of empire. Stage 1. Military overextension. Spain felt it had a divine mandate to police the world. Does that sound familiar? They fought wars everywhere, all at once. They fought the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean to save Christendom. They fought France and Italy for dominance in Europe. They fought a brutal, grinding counterinsurgency against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, their own version of a forever war. They fought England on the high seas. They garrisoned troops in the Philippines and across the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 continents. The logistics alone were a nightmare. The cost was astronomical. Half of Spain's entire imperial revenue, all that silver from the Americas, went immediately to the military. And still, it wasn't enough. The empire was eating money faster than the mines could produce it. Stage 2, currency debasement. When the taxes didn't cover the wars and the silver wasn't arriving fast enough, the Spanish crown did what every desperate government eventually does. They cheated. They debased the currency. They introduced the vellon, a coin that was supposed to be silver, but slowly the mints started mixing in copper. At first, it was just a little. A coin that was 100% silver became 50% copper, then 75% copper, then 99% copper. The face value said 1 real, but the physics said worthless metal. The result? Hyperinflation. Merchants aren't stupid. They realized the coins were junk, so they raised prices. A loaf of bread that cost 1 coin suddenly cost 10. The cost of living exploded for the Spanish peasantry, while the elite at court continued to live in luxury, insulated by their land and titles. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Even with the stolen silver and the fake copper coins, Spain couldn't pay its bills. So they borrowed. They borrowed from the Fuggers in Germany and the Genoese bankers in Italy. They borrowed against future silver fleets that hadn't even sailed yet. By 1557, less than 20 years into Philip's reign, the unthinkable happened. The richest empire on earth declared bankruptcy. They defaulted on their sovereign debt. The shockwaves tore through the European economy. But did they stop? No. They restructured the debt, promised to be good, and went right back to borrowing. They declared bankruptcy again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596. 4 sovereign defaults in 40 years. It was a Ponzi scheme masquerading as a superpower. Each time, they promised reform. Each time, the addiction to spending was too strong to break. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. This is the stage that is most critical for Americans to understand today. Here is the paradox of Spain's collapse. They had all the money in the world, and that is exactly what destroyed them. Because when you can buy anything, you stop making everything. Why grow wheat in Castile when you can import it from Sicily? Why build ships in Barcelona when you can buy them from the Dutch? Why innovate technology when you can just pay others to do it for you? The Spanish nobility began to view manual labor and commerce as vulgar. It was beneath them. The manufacturing base of Spain withered away. Agriculture stagnated. The massive wealth flowing in from the Americas didn't stay in Spain. It flowed through Spain. It acted like water through a sieve. The gold went straight out the other side to pay for French wine, Italian silk, and Dutch weaponry. Spain became a hollow conduit. By 1600, they were producing almost nothing of value. They were entirely dependent on imports to survive. They were a consumer economy with no production engine. And the moment the silver mines began to run dry, when the easy money stopped, the entire illusion collapsed. Stage 5. Social decay. With the economy hollowed out, society began to fracture. The middle class was obliterated by inflation. Crime exploded. The streets of Madrid were filled with beggars, vagabonds, and thieves. And then came the brain drain. The productive citizens, the merchants, the artisans, the thinkers, saw the writing on the wall. They immigrated. They left for France, for England, for the Netherlands, countries that were still hungry, countries that were still building. Spain was left with a population of bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests, a nation of people waiting for a government check that was worth less every day. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1650, they lost the Netherlands, their economic engine. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was a rotting shell. It was still large on maps, but economically, it was a corpse. They went from the undisputed masters of the universe to a geopolitical afterthought in less than a century. Today, Spain is a beautiful country. It has great food, lovely beaches, and a relaxed pace of life. But it is a museum. The descendants of the conquistadors now serve drinks to tourists. That is the price of Stage 7. But Spain was just the rehearsal. Let's jump forward 300 years to the empire that perfected the art of global dominance, only to lose it all in a single generation. Let's jump forward 300 years. The setting shifts from the sun-drenched palaces of Madrid to the foggy, industrial heart of London, the 1900s. This was the British Empire. The empire where the sun never set. At its absolute zenith, Britain didn't just rule the waves, they owned the map. They controlled 25% of the Earth's land surface and ruled over 400 million subjects. The pound sterling was the undeniable king of finance, the global reserve currency. Every major trade contract, from tea in India to rubber in Malaya, was denominated in pounds. Every central bank from Tokyo to Buenos Aires held British bonds as their risk-free asset. London was the financial neural center of the planet. And just like Spain 3 centuries earlier, the British believed this state of affairs was permanent. They believed in British exceptionalism. They thought their institutions, their navy, and their banking system were immune to the laws of gravity. But history doesn't care about your monuments. By 1900, Britain was already sleepwalking into the pattern. Stage 1. Military overextension. By the turn of the 20th century, Britain was suffering from imperial fatigue. They had military commitments in India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. They were defending territory on 6 continents simultaneously. The Royal Navy had to be everywhere at once. The cost was bleeding the treasury dry. And then came the breaking point. 1914, World War I. Britain faced an impossible choice, one that every hegemon eventually faces. Stay neutral and let a rival, Germany, dominate your backyard, or jump in and bankrupt the empire to maintain your status. They chose to fight. World War I was an economic incinerator. It cost Britain over $40 billion, that is roughly $1 trillion in today's purchasing power. To finance this, they shattered their own piggy bank. They borrowed from everyone, but mostly, They borrowed from the emerging industrial giant across the ocean, the United States. By 1918, the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. Britain had won the war, yes. They kept the flags flying over the empire. But financially, they were dead men walking. The creditor had become the debtor. The master had become the client. Stage 2. Currency debasement. This is where the psychology of decline becomes fascinating. Britain refused to accept they were broke. Before the war, the pound sterling was backed by gold. It was sound money. But the war had drained Britain's vaults. They had shipped literal boatloads of gold to New York to pay for bullets, wheat, and steel. By 1920, their reserves were half of what they had been in 1914. Logic dictated they should devalue the currency to reflect their new, poorer reality. But pride dictated otherwise. In 1925, led by Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Britain made a fatal economic error. They returned to the gold standard at the pre-war rate. They tried to pretend the war hadn't cost them anything. The result was catastrophic. The pound was massively overvalued. British exports, coal, steel, textiles, became too expensive for the world to buy. Manufacturing collapsed. Unemployment in the industrial north soared. To defend this artificial exchange rate, the government had to keep interest rates punishingly high, which strangled the domestic economy. They strangled their own people to save the reputation of their currency. It didn't work. By 1931, the market forced their hand. Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just admitted to the world, we cannot keep our promises. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Britain never recovered from the debts of World War I. And then, history threw a second punch, World War II. Another $120 billion in costs. More frantic borrowing from America. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada over $30 billion, an amount larger than Britain's entire GDP. They had won the war against Hitler, but they had lost the war for survival. The United States emerged as the undisputed titan of industry and finance, while Britain was left with rationing, bombed-out cities, and a ledger full of red ink. They literally couldn't afford to keep the lights on in the empire anymore. Stage 4. Loss of empire. When the money runs out, the flags come down. It is a simple equation. In 1947, Britain granted independence to India. This wasn't just a territory. This was the jewel in the crown, the economic engine that had fed British wealth for 2 centuries. Gone. Once the dam broke, the flood followed. Over the next 20 years, Britain liquidated its assets. They withdrew from Palestine, from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from the Caribbean. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in history books and nostalgia. Stage 5. Currency collapse. The decline of the currency mirrors the decline of the power. In 1940, 1 British pound bought you $4.03 US. That was the exchange rate. By 1950, after a brutal devaluation, it was $2.80. By 1967, it fell to $2.40. By the 1980s, it touched $1.05. Today, it hovers around $1.27. The pound sterling, once the gold standard of the world, became just another regional currency, useful for buying fish and chips in London, but irrelevant for settling oil trades in Saudi Arabia. Britain tried to maintain the pretense of power. They kept a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. They developed nuclear weapons. They talked about a special relationship with America. But the world knew the truth. Britain was a museum of what used to be great, a geopolitical theme park. The transition was relatively peaceful because they handed the keys to a friendly successor, the United States. But make no mistake, the empire didn't retire, it went bankrupt. Now let's look at the most recent example, the one that many of you remember, the one that proves this isn't ancient history, it's modern reality, the Soviet Union. 1945 to 1991. The story of the USSR is terrifying because of the speed. It shows how a superpower can look invincible on the outside while being completely hollow on the inside. After World War II, the Soviet Union emerged as the other half of the global duopoly. They had massive military control over Eastern Europe. They beat America into space with Sputnik. They had 30,000 nuclear warheads. Their ideology was exported to Vietnam, Cuba, Africa. They genuinely believed they were the future, that history was on their side. For 45 years, they competed with America. They matched us tank for tank, missile for missile, spy for spy. But beneath the parade grounds and the propaganda posters, the Soviet economy was suffering from organ failure. Stage 1. Military overextension, again. The Soviet Union made the fatal mistake of trying to be a military superpower with a third world economy. They spent an estimated 15% to 20% of their entire GDP on the military. Think about that number. The US currently spends about 3.5%. The Soviets were spending triple, quadruple that relative to their size. They were fighting a proxy war in Afghanistan, their own Vietnam, which bled them dry for a decade. They were propping up Castro in Cuba, supporting regimes in Syria, Angola, Ethiopia, North Korea. Everywhere America placed a chess piece, the Soviets felt compelled to place one too, but they were playing with a much smaller bankroll. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet growth engine had seized up. Central planning, the idea that a few bureaucrats in Moscow could set the price of everything from bread to tractors, proved to be a disaster. Factories produced goods nobody wanted. The quality was garbage. Innovation died because there was no incentive to improve. Why build a better tractor if you get paid the same for building a broken one? By the 1980s, the unthinkable happened. The Soviet Union started importing grain. This was a country that controlled the Black Earth region of Ukraine, some of the most fertile soil on the planet, and yet they couldn't feed their own people. They were selling their gold reserves to buy wheat from the United States. Why? Because when the government controls everything, nobody produces anything. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The Soviet ruble was a funny money currency. It wasn't convertible. You couldn't take rubles to Paris and buy a baguette. Nobody wanted them. Internally, even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. The real currency of the Soviet Union became vodka, blue jeans, and Marlboro cigarettes. The shadow economy took over. The government had to pay for foreign technology and food using hard assets, gold and oil, and that was the kill shot. In the mid-1980s, global oil prices crashed. The Soviet lifeline was cut. Their gold reserves were depleting. The cash flow stopped. Stage 4. Loss of empire. When the checks stop clearing, the loyalty evaporates. In 1989, the Berlin Wall didn't just fall, it was pushed over by the weight of economic reality. Eastern Europe looked at the West and saw prosperity. They looked at Moscow and saw breadlines. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany. They all left. In the span of a single year, the Soviet buffer zone vanished. The Kremlin watched it happen and did nothing. Why? Because they couldn't afford the gas to send the tanks. They were broke. Stage 5. Complete collapse. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. It took less than 900 days from the first cracks in the Berlin Wall to the total dissolution of the state. There was no foreign invasion. No NATO tanks rolled into Moscow. The superpower simply imploded. The military stopped getting paid. The police stopped enforcing laws. The ruble became toilet paper. A nation with the power to destroy the world 10 times over collapsed because it couldn't balance a checkbook. The pattern played out again. Military overextension, economic stagnation, currency debasement, loss of empire, collapse. And here is where the story shifts from history to us. We look at Spain, Britain, and the USSR as distant examples. We laugh at their mistakes. We tell ourselves, we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We have Silicon Valley. We have the reserve currency. It can't happen here. But the data suggests we are lying to ourselves. The United States has already completed stage 5. We are following the script perfectly. The United States is not immune to history. We are not special. We are simply the latest actor to take the stage, reciting the same lines that led Spain to ruin, Britain to irrelevance, and the Soviet Union to oblivion. Let's stop pretending. Let's look at the scorecard, stage by stage. Stage 1, military overextension. Just like Spain in 1580 fighting on 4 continents, the United States has stretched itself into a thin, brittle web across the globe. We currently maintain over 750 military bases in 80 different countries. We have active troops in 150 nations. We are the guarantors of global trade, the police force of the oceans, and the security shield for Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Our annual military budget is approaching $850 billion. That is more than the next 10 nations combined, including China and Russia. But ask yourself, is it enough? The Pentagon War Games suggest otherwise. We are committed to defending Taiwan from China, defending Ukraine via NATO from Russia, protecting Israel, and keeping the shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf open. Here is part 3 of the rewritten script. The United States is not immune to history. We are not special. We are simply the latest actor to take the stage, reciting the same lines that led Spain to ruin, Britain to irrelevance, and the Soviet Union to oblivion. Let's stop pretending. Let's look at the scorecard, stage by stage. Stage 1, military overextension. Just like Spain in 1580 fighting on 4 continents, the United States has stretched itself into a thin, brittle web across the globe. We currently maintain over 750 military bases in 80 different countries. We have active troops in 150 nations. We are the guarantors of global trade, the police force of the oceans, and the security shield for Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Our annual military budget is approaching $850 billion. That is more than the next 10 nations combined, including China and Russia. But ask yourself, is it enough? The Pentagon War Games suggest otherwise. We are committed to defending Taiwan from China, defending Ukraine via NATO from Russia, protecting Israel, and keeping the shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf open. Shutterstock Kham Fa. If 2 of these conflicts explode simultaneously, we are mathematically incapable of responding to both with overwhelming force. Our equipment is aging. Our recruitment numbers are at historic lows. Young Americans are no longer signing up to fight. We are a global empire running on fumes, committed to promises made 50 years ago that we can no longer afford to keep. We are overextended. Check. Stage 2, currency debasement. This is the engine of the collapse. It always starts here. In 1971, President Richard Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. He severed the link between the US dollar and gold. In that moment, the dollar went from being a certificate of wealth to a certificate of debt. It became pure fiat, paper backed by nothing but promises. Since that day, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. A house that cost $20,000 then costs $400,000 now. That isn't the house getting more valuable, that is the currency dying. But the real acceleration began in 2008, and it went vertical in 2020. In just the last few years, we have printed over $6 trillion out of thin air. We didn't mix copper into silver coins like the Spanish kings. We did something more efficient. We typed zeros into a computer. The result is the same. Inflation is not transitory. It is the mathematical consequence of debasement. We are robbing the future to pay for the present. We have flooded the world with dollars, and we are assuming the world will always want them. History says that assumption is fatal. Check. Stage 3, the debt spiral. This is the point of no return. The United States national debt stands at $36 trillion. That number is so large it becomes abstract, so let's make it concrete. That is roughly 120% of our GDP. But the total debt isn't the scariest number. The scary number is the interest. Because interest rates have risen, the cost to service that debt has exploded. We are now paying nearly $1 trillion a year just in interest. We are spending more on interest payments to bondholders than we spend on the entire U.S. military. We are spending more on interest than on Medicare. Think about that. We are borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. That is the textbook definition of a debt spiral. It is a Ponzi scheme. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until it lost its sovereignty. The Soviet Union ran out of hard currency. We are currently adding $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days. There is no mathematical way to pay this back. We can only inflate it away, destroying the currency, or default, destroying the economy. There is no third door. Check. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. A superpower must make things. Real power is physical. It is steel, microchips, energy, and food. But over the last 40 years, America adopted a new philosophy: financialization. We decided that making things was dirty and low margin. We shipped our factories to China, our assembly lines to Mexico, our textiles to Vietnam. We kept the branding, the marketing, and the banking in New York and California. We trade pieces of paper, stocks, bonds, derivatives, while our rivals trade physical goods. We run an annual trade deficit of nearly $1 trillion. We consume $1 trillion more than we produce. We are critically dependent on foreign adversaries for our survival. Antibiotics, mostly made in China. Advanced batteries, China. The rare earth minerals needed for our fighter jets, China. If global trade stops tomorrow, America does not have the factories to restart. We have hollowed out the engine of our own survival. Just like Spain in 1600, we are rich in money but poor in capacity. We have become a nation of middlemen, skimming profit off goods made by others. And when the others decide to stop shipping, the shelves go empty. Check. Stage 5. Social decay. This is the stage that feels personal. This is what you see when you walk down the streets of San Francisco, Philadelphia, or parts of New York. When an empire's economy rots, its society fractures. The unspoken contract between the citizen and the state. I work hard, you keep me safe and provide opportunity, is broken. Trust in U.S. institutions, Congress, the media, the Supreme Court, the banking system is at all-time lows. We cannot agree on basic facts. Political polarization has paralyzed the government. We aren't just arguing, we are living in 2 different realities. And then there are the deaths of despair. Over 100,000 Americans die annually from drug overdoses, mostly fentanyl. That is a Vietnam War casualty count every single year, happening in silence. Homelessness is exploding. The fertility rate has collapsed because young people don't feel confident enough in the future to start families. The best and brightest are opting out. They are quiet quitting, moving off grid, or simply disengaging from a system they feel is rigged. This is exactly what happened in late-stage Rome and 17th century Spain. When the game is fixed, people stop playing. Check. We are standing firmly in Stage 5. The Soviet Union made it to Stage 5 before it imploded. Britain made it to Stage 5 before it handed over the keys. We are not approaching the pattern. We are drowning in it. What comes next? Stage 6. Loss of reserve. Currency status. This is the tipping point. This is the moment the music stops. Being the global reserve currency is an exorbitant privilege. It means we can print money to pay for oil, cars, and electronics. The world accepts our green paper because they need it to trade with each other. It allows us to live beyond our means, running deficits that would bankrupt any other nation in a month. But that privilege is eroding. Right now, as you watch this, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and their new members are actively building a parallel financial system. They are trading oil in yuan. They are buying gold at record rates. They are creating payment systems that bypass the US dollar and the SWIFT network. Why? Because they saw what we did to Russia in 2022. We weaponized the dollar, seizing their reserves. Every nation took note. If the US can seize our money, the dollar is not safe. The share of global reserves held in dollars is slowly ticking down. It happens slowly, then all at once. When the world decides it no longer needs dollars, those trillions of dollars currently circulating overseas will come flooding back home. Imagine hyperinflation, but imported instantly. That is stage 6, and we are seeing the early tremors right now. Stage 7. The collapse. It is never a gradual glide path, it is a cliff. Imperial collapse is a phase change, like water turning to ice. It seems liquid until the temperature hits 0 and then it snaps. The Soviet Union, 900 days. The British Empire, 20 years. Spain. A slow grind, but the power vanished quickly. When the reserve currency fails, the debt becomes impossible to service. The government has to print more to pay the bills, which kills the currency faster, which makes the debt harder to pay. It is a doom loop. Suddenly, the military cannot be funded. Bases close, alliances fracture, the pension funds dissolve. The wealth locked in the stock market evaporates because it was denominated in a currency that no longer holds value. This is the future the pattern predicts. It is the future the math dictates. So, is it inevitable? 3 empires followed this path. Each believed they were the exception. Each believed their culture, their god, or their technology would save them. Each was wrong. We are telling ourselves the same lies. We have AI. We have the aircraft carriers. We are America. But the laws of economics are like gravity. They do not care about your flag. You cannot spend more than you make forever. You cannot consume what you do not produce. You cannot print prosperity. We have accelerated every single stage since 2020. We are not walking the path, we are sprinting down it. But here is the twist. The one thing that separates a tragedy from a lesson is what you do with the information.